Okay, this is part 4 of assembling the Prusa MK3S Plus. So we'll start this off with getting the belt onto the extruder on the x-axis here. And this belt is going to help the extruder move from left to right. So it's important that we get this on there properly and nice and tight. We don't want any slack in the belt because any little bit of slack will cause the print to have weird lines in it, stuff like that. So we want this to be tensioned nicely. Okay, when we get the belt to about here, we'll spin the machine around so that we can easily guide it through this end pulley. And we want to loosen the pulley so that we can align it so that the belt stays straight. So we can see that I put this one on backwards and it doesn't line up properly. So I just flipped it around. We'll tighten it back up and we'll make sure that it's straight with the other side of the belt. Then we'll feed the rest of the belt through, and then we can press the end of the belt into the extruder where the belt catches. So the instructions say loosen up this side for the motor mount. There's a little bit of slack in the screw spaces for the motor to slide back and forth a little bit. If you look carefully, there's about 5 millimeters or so for it to slide back and forth. This allows us to tension the belt by moving the motor that the belt's attached to. So you'll see here when I pull on the belt, if you watch the motor, it does tilt up and down a little bit, and this is where we can get the slack reduced in the belt. So you'll see that there. And once you get the tension right in the belt, you'll tighten up the motor and it won't move, and the tension should stay there. Further down the road, if you do need to retension the belt, there's a tension screw that we can screw in that will pull the belt tight, or we can adjust the motor a little bit. So this part's a little bit finicky. You got to kind of hold the motor there and slide the belt into the slot where the belt catches. It is possible to do it. As you can see, I did it with just my 2 hands. You just got to hold it in a specific fashion to get that in there. So here I'm just testing the belt tension by trying to squeeze the 2 belts together. And then I'll put a little bit of twist on the motor as I tighten it. Not a lot, just enough to settle the tension in the belt. And then I'll tighten up the motor again. There goes that Allen key. So now we'll make sure the grub screw on the motor end pulley is nice and tight. And we'll just make sure that it's tight enough by trying to move the extruder while holding the axle of the motor so that we know that the pulley isn't slipping on the axle stem. And we'll just trim off the excess part of the belt. Make sure you don't nick or touch the actual belt that's being used with the razor blade. That would cause issues later down the road. So on the other side, there is a screw that we can tighten just behind the 3D printed part, and that will apply tension. It's a longer screw that was added earlier, and this kind of pushes the pulley in the motor away from the frame of the printer. So once you get your tension dialed in, we're going to move to adding the wire guides for the extruder. So we're going to cut a 45 into this piece of plastic. It's a little bit stiff, and this plastic is what is used to have some sort of guided tension holding up the wires so that they do not just floppy, hanging and dangling around the printer. So we'll push this into the hole. Make sure it's in there tightly. It's a one-way hole, so when you go in, you shouldn't really be able to pull it out very easily. So I'm just using the pliers here to kind of turn it and push in it at the same time so that it is in there pretty good. And now we'll assemble the back plate for the extruder. This is going to hold our bearings in place and provide a place for the wires to be guided through and bundled nicely. So we'll put the nut in the back of the back plate for the extruder. It's a nice firm fit, and then we'll attach our wire guide and wire attachment point to the back plate, just with the long screw. And then we'll comb our cables, make sure they're all nice and organized and bundled nicely together to prevent any kinking or damage to the wires when the extruder is moving around. And we'll guide all of those wires, specifically just these ones. You don't want to add any extras from the extruder here, just the ones in the guide. And we'll put them through the hole in the back plate, and make sure that your wire guide that's sticking out that we attached is facing the right direction, or you won't be able to attach the back plate to the extruder. Okay, so it's a little bit finicky here. You want to kind of adjust and press the wires in such a way that they get guided nicely through the back plate and don't bunch up and pinch. And then we'll add a couple screws to the back plate and tighten them up. This is going to hold your bearings in place and the extruder and the wires nicely. You don't want to over tighten this, as it could cause a little bit of binding in the slides of the bearings. Now we have our wire sleeve. This is going to keep all of the wires bundled up nicely, and it's a little bit finicky to get going, and by the time you're close to the end, you've just gotten good enough at it that it's easy to do, and then you don't need to do it anymore. So we'll wrap this around the wires and this stiff piece of plastic that's going to kind of hold this wire bundle together and up in the air, not kind of flopping around. So you'll want to get it curled on the inside all the way around as many wires as possible, and then the other side kind of fold over, and then just kind of work at it until the wires are getting in there. You don't want to do the entire bundle of wires because you're going to be adding the heater core and temperature sensor wires to it about 3 inches out from the wire guide and these zip ties. So we'll go ahead and get the zip ties on there, And these are going to hold the wires, the wire guide, and the sleeve to the extruder so that it moves with the extruder and it's not flopping around. So now we'll get the wire for the heater core and the temperature sensors and the fan that's on the end of the extruder. And we will unbundle those and we'll add them to the bottom of the wire stand. And then we'll integrate those into the sleeving of the other wires. So the zip ties you don't want to over tighten. You want them to be snug, but not tight. You just want to hold the wires in place. You don't need to stop them from moving at all. If you put them too tight, they might cause issues down the road because this does move back and forth and you don't want the wires to be damaged by the zip ties. And we're done this portion. Let's have some gummy bears and move to the next section. The LCD panel. So to assemble the LCD panel, we'll get everything here out of the way and we'll grab our LCD parts. So we get our LCD panel, bag of hardware, and an SD card. Just confirm that our LCD panel cables are connected to the back properly. That's what the manual's saying. And then we'll get our 3D printed LCD panel case and the knob. Our couple screws, we'll get everything organized so that we can properly get the LCD panel put together here. Okay, so let's unbundle the cables at the back of the LCD. And make sure that the cable connectors are properly pressed into the panel. And then we'll slide our legs on. And fit the panel into the case. We'll make sure that the PCB gets clipped into the clip on the case so it doesn't fall out. And then we need to add our screws to the legs and we'll tighten those in. For me, these screws were a little bit tight, as you can hear. Once we get those screws tightened, we will add our square nuts into the legs. And these also were a little bit tight, so I used the Allen keys to kind of fidget them into their spots. So now we'll load our bolts into the frame of the printer. This is where the LCD is going to get attached to. We'll load it up and we'll screw it in with an Allen key. You'll want to move the bed back a little bit for some more space You'll see here that I do that in a second because there's no space. And then the finishing touch, the knob for the printer LCD screen. And that finishes this part. Gummy bears. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.